The chandeliers blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal glasses and jeweled necklaces, until the entire ballroom of Hartley Manor seemed to shimmer with aggressive celebration. Lady Laura Cecil sat rigidly at a side table, her gloved hands folded precisely in her lap, her spine straight as the iron railings outside, her face arranged into what she desperately hoped resembled serene indifference. She was failing spectacularly. "More champagne, my lady?" A footman hovered at her elbow, his expression professionally blank, though Laura detected the faint shadow of pity in his eyes. Even the servants knew. Everyone knew. "No, thank you," she murmured, her voice steady despite the tempest raging beneath her composed exterior. The footman bowed and retreated, leaving Laura once more to her torture. Across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, Lord Edward Hartley, her Edward though he had never truly been hers, waltzed with his bride. The new Lady Hartley wore ivory silk that probably cost more than Laura's entire year's dress allowance, her throat draped with pearls that caught the candlelight with each graceful turn. Miss Caroline Pemberton, now Lady Hartley, possessed something far more valuable than impeccable breeding or a distinguished lineage. She possessed a fortune derived from her father's spice trading empire, vulgar commerce, the old guard whispered behind their fans, but commerce that had purchased an earl's son and a future of unimaginable luxury. "Lady Laura, you simply must try the lobster pastries." Miss Sophia Bradshaw, Laura's companion, leaned close, her round face flushed with excitement and perhaps too much champagne. "And have you seen that gentleman by the refreshment table? Mr. Stanhope, I believe. 3,000 a year, they say, and no wife to spend it. Perhaps if you were to—" "Sophia," Laura's voice held a note of gentle warning. "I merely suggest that moping serves no purpose," Sophia whispered, though her attention had already drifted toward the dessert table. "One must be practical about these matters. You're 23, my lady, and while that's hardly on the shelf, neither are you a fresh-faced girl of 18. Your mother was wise to insist you attend tonight. Hiding would have been tantamount to admission of, well, of heartbreak, of humiliation, of the crushing disappointment of discovering that love, or what she had believed was love, meant nothing in the face of financial necessity." Laura's fingers tightened imperceptibly in her lap. Her mother, Lady Margaret Cecil, had been adamant that morning as Laura's maid had dressed her hair. "Hold your head high, my darling girl," her mother had said, adjusting the simple strand of pearls at Laura's throat, the only jewelry that remained after her father's debts had been settled. "Let them see that you are perfectly well, that Lord Hartley's choice affects you not in the slightest, but it did affect her profoundly. Not because she loved Edward. She had realized in the brutal clarity of rejection that she had been more in love with the idea of security, of belonging, of finally having a home that couldn't be taken away. Edward had been kind, attentive, everything a suitable match should be, until his father's gambling debts had made Miss Pemberton's fortune irresistible. No, what devastated Laura wasn't love lost. It was the public nature of her dismissal, the way every eye in this ballroom tracked her with varying degrees of sympathy, amusement, or schadenfreude. She was the spectacle of the evening, the pathetic Lady Laura, discarded and present to witness her own replacement. "Lady Ashworth keeps glancing this way," Sophia murmured, oblivious to Laura's internal struggle. "And Miss Weatherby just whispered something to her sister. Oh dear, they're giggling now. Perhaps we should—" Whatever Sophia was about to suggest died on her lips. The music faltered, conversations dimmed. Even the clink of glasses seemed to soften as every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. Laura looked up, and her heart stopped. He stood in the doorway with the casual confidence of a man who knew exactly the effect his presence created. Tall, taller than any man in the room, with shoulders that strained slightly against the perfect tailoring of his black evening coat. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was swept back from a face that could have been carved by a sculptor, obsessed with masculine beauty and aristocratic arrogance in equal measure. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from Laura's lungs. Dark, intense, intelligent eyes that swept across the ballroom with the predatory assessment of a wolf surveying a field of sheep. Fernando Montanilla, the Duke of Valcarcel. Merciful heavens, Sophia breathed, her forgotten champagne glass tilting dangerously. That's him, the Spanish Duke. They say he owns silver mines and 3 palaces in Andalusia, They say he once fought a duel over a matter of honor and— But Laura heard none of it, because memory crashed over her like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. Seville, summer, 1803. Come, pequeña Laura. The oranges are sweetest at the top of the tree. I can't reach, Fernando. I'm too small. You are never too small if you are brave. Here, take my hand. I will not let you fall. 15 years. 15 years since that magical summer when her father, serving as an attaché to the British ambassador, had accepted the hospitality of the old Duke of Valcarcel at his magnificent estate outside Seville. 8-year-old Laura had been desperately lonely, transplanted from England to a country where she understood neither the language nor the customs. And then Fernando, the Duke's only son, 16 years old, impossibly kind, and already possessed of that devastating smile, had taken pity on the awkward English girl. He had taught her to climb the orange trees in the estate's vast gardens. He had laughed at her terrible pronunciation of Spanish words and patiently corrected her. He had shown her how to feed sugar to the Andalusian horses, how to find the coolest fountains on scorching afternoons, how to be brave and free and utterly herself. That summer had been the happiest of her childhood. And then it had ended. Her father's assignment concluded, and they returned to England. 2 years later, her father died suddenly, taking with him any possibility of returning to Spain. The correspondence between the families gradually ceased. Laura heard years later that the old Duke had also passed away, that Fernando had inherited the title and vast estates. But the boy who had made her feel brave had become nothing more than a cherished memory, filed away with other remnants of childhood. Until now, because the man who dominated the Hartley ballroom bore little resemblance to that gentle boy. This Fernando radiated power and danger in equal measure. The whispers that followed him through London society spoke of ruthless business dealings, of ruined reputations, of a cold intelligence that showed no mercy to those who crossed him. They said he had left Spain under mysterious circumstances after his father's death. They said he had enemies on the continent who would kill him if he returned. They said no woman who attracted his attention emerged unscathed. "He's coming this way," Sophia gasped, gripping Laura's arm with surprising strength. "Lady Laura, the Duke of Valcarcel is coming toward our table." Laura's pulse thundered in her ears. Surely he wouldn't remember her. She had been a child, insignificant, one of dozens of diplomatic guests who had passed through his father's estate over the years. But as Fernando drew closer, cutting through the parted crowd with leonine grace, his dark eyes fixed directly on her, something in his gaze suggested memory, recognition, and something far more dangerous. He stopped before their table. Up close he was even more imposing. His presence seemed to fill the space, making the air feel charged, electric. The faint scent of sandalwood and something indefinably foreign reached Laura's senses. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Fernando bowed with the fluid elegance of continental aristocracy, his eyes never leaving Laura's face. When he spoke, his voice was deep, melodious, carrying the faint rolling accent of Castilian Spanish that transformed even English words into something exotic and compelling. Lady Laura Cecil. Not a question, a statement. He knew exactly who she was. "Forgive my presumption, but you appear to be in urgent need of better air and more interesting company than this gathering provides." He extended his hand, his gaze intensifying with something between challenge and invitation. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the gardens, and have the goodness to pretend that you desire my company as much as I desire yours?" The last words were pitched low, meant only for her ears, but they carried an intimacy that sent heat flooding through Laura's body. Sophia made a strangled sound. Somewhere behind them, a glass shattered. The music had stopped entirely now, and 300 pairs of eyes fixed on Lady Laura Cecil and the Duke of Valcarcel. Laura's mind reeled. He remembered. After 15 years he remembered. But there was more in those dark eyes than simple recognition. There was heat, intensity, and something almost predatory that both terrified and thrilled her. Every rule of propriety screamed at her to refuse. A lady did not accept invitations from dangerous foreign dukes. A lady did not allow herself to be led into darkened gardens by a man with such a scandalous reputation. But Lady Laura was already ruined in the eyes of this assembly. The pathetic, jilted woman, an object of pity and mockery. What did she have left to lose? A spark of rebellion, dormant for years beneath layers of propriety and careful restraint, suddenly flared to life in her chest. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong, warm, infinitely confident, and something electric passed between them at the contact. Fernando's smile was slow, devastatingly masculine, transforming his severe features into something that made Laura's breath catch. "Wise choice, pequeña Laura," he murmured, so softly only she could hear the childhood endearment. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm with possessive certainty, and Laura felt the hard muscle beneath his coat, the coiled power in his frame. As he led her through the parted crowd, Laura was acutely aware of every scandalous whisper, every shocked gasp. She saw Edward freeze mid-step in his waltz, his face draining of colour. She saw Lady Hartley's mother clutch her fan with white-knuckled fingers. She saw Lady Ashworth's mouth drop open in unladylike astonishment. And for the first time all evening, for the first time in months, Lady Laura Cecil felt something other than humiliation. She felt alive. The night air hit them like a benediction as they stepped through the French doors onto the terrace. After the oppressive heat of the ballroom, the cool May evening felt like absolution. The gardens stretched before them, illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across manicured hedges and gravel paths. Fernando didn't speak immediately. He led her down the terrace steps, past the formal gardens toward a more secluded area where a small fountain burbled peacefully beneath a canopy of ancient oaks. Only when they were safely away from curious eyes did he release her hand and turn to face her. In the torchlight, his face was all dramatic shadows and sharp angles, but his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, held unexpected gentleness. "You have changed, pequeña Laura," he said softly, his accent wrapping around her name like a caress. "You were a brave little girl who conquered orange trees. Now you are a beautiful woman who endures ballrooms full of fools with remarkable dignity." Laura's throat tightened. "You remember?" "Of course I remember." Something flashed across his face, pain perhaps, or regret. "That summer was the last time I was truly happy before." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Before life became complicated." "I heard about your father, I'm so sorry." Fernando's expression shuttered. "Death is one of the few certainties in this world. We all face it eventually." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "But I did not rescue you from that assembly of vultures to discuss the dead. I came to ask why Lady Laura Cecil, daughter of the late Sir Thomas Cecil, granddaughter of the Earl of Windermere, would subject herself to the torture of watching her former suitor marry another woman." Laura's cheeks burned. "You are remarkably well informed, Your Grace. I make it my business to be informed, especially about people who—" He paused, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "About people who once mattered to me. I was 8 years old, Your Grace. Surely I was merely one of many forgettable children who passed through your father's house. You climbed my favorite orange tree and refused to come down until I promised to teach you Spanish curse words." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You were far from forgettable. Despite everything, the humiliation of the evening, the confusion of this encounter, the dangerous allure of this man," Laura felt a smile tug at her lips. "You taught me the wrong words. I told your father's housekeeper that her cooking was, well, I still don't know exactly what I said, but she chased me through the gardens with a wooden spoon." Fernando's laugh was rich, genuine, transforming his severe face entirely. "Ah, yes, Señora Gutierrez. She had a legendary temper, and an equally legendary wooden spoon. I had forgotten that incident." His expression sobered. "But I had not forgotten you, Laura. Even when years passed and life took us in different directions, I remembered the brave English girl with the wild hair and the fearless heart." Laura's pulse quickened. "I'm not that girl anymore, Your Grace." "Fernando," his voice was firm. "My name is Fernando. We climb trees together, pequeña Laura. I think we can dispense with excessive formality. Society would be scandalized." "Society," Fernando said with magnificent disdain, "is already scandalized. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be buzzing with speculation about the compromising situation I have created for you. Your reputation will be thoroughly ruined." Laura's breath caught. She hadn't thought, Hadn't considered. Fernando moved closer, his presence overwhelming, his scent surrounding her. Which is precisely why you will allow me to call on you tomorrow afternoon, and the afternoon after that, and every afternoon thereafter, until society concludes that the Duke of Valcarcel is courting Lady Laura Cecil with honourable intentions. That's absurd. You can't possibly— Can I not? His eyes glittered with challenge. I am one of the wealthiest men in England, Pequeña Laura. I own estates in 3 countries. Kings and princes seek my financial counsel. What I cannot accomplish through wealth, I accomplish through strategic manipulation of public opinion. And what I want, I generally acquire. And what do you want? Laura whispered, though she feared she knew the answer. Fernando raised his hand slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she didn't move, he brushed his fingers along her jaw with devastating gentleness. I want to wipe that look of defeat from your eyes, he said softly. I want to remind you that you are brave and fierce and utterly magnificent. I want to show that room full of small-minded fools that Lady Laura Cecil is worth 10 of their vapid heiresses. His thumb traced her lower lip, and heat pooled in Laura's belly. And perhaps, I want to discover if the girl I remembered has become a woman I could— He didn't finish, but the intensity in his gaze finished the sentence for him. Laura should retreat, should slap his hand away, should remind him that she was a lady and he was being unconscionably forward. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Why? Why?" Fernando's smile was dangerous, wolfish, because 15 years ago, a little English girl looked at me like I was a hero instead of a burden, like I was kind instead of merely obligated, because in a ballroom full of people tonight, you were the only one worth saving. His voice dropped lower, intimate. And because, Pequeña Laura, I have the distinct impression that you and I are very much alike. We have both been hurt by people who should have protected us, and we have both learned to hide our wounds behind perfect manners and cold politeness. He was too close, too intense, too dangerously perceptive. You don't know me, Laura managed, though her voice lacked conviction. Then let me learn. Fernando stepped back slightly, releasing her but not breaking eye contact. Let me court you properly in the full view of society. Let me be your shield against their gossip and your weapon against their cruelty. And if, at the end of it, you decide you want nothing more to do with the dangerous Spanish Duke, I will bow gracefully and disappear from your life. And if I refuse now? Fernando's expression turned calculating. Then tomorrow, every scandal sheet in London will report that the Duke of Valcarcel was seen in a passionate embrace with Lady Laura Cecil in the Hartley Gardens. Your reputation will be destroyed, and you will have gained nothing in exchange. Laura's eyes widened. You wouldn't. I would. No apology, no shame. I told you, Pequeña Laura, I am not the boy you remember. I am ruthless when I want something, and I want you to have the life you deserve, the respect you deserve, even if I must manipulate circumstances to provide it. It was blackmail, elegant, sophisticated blackmail, wrapped in concern and delivered with devastating charm. Laura should be furious, should march back into that ballroom and expose his scheme. Instead, she felt that spark of rebellion flare brighter, because Fernando was right about one thing. She had nothing left to lose. Her reputation was already in tatters. Edward had made his choice. Her modest inheritance meant she would never attract a suitable match based on fortune. But the Duke of Valcarcel was offering her something infinitely more valuable than marriage or money. He was offering her revenge. Very well, Laura heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. You may call on me tomorrow afternoon, but understand this, Your Grace. Fernando, she corrected, the name strange on her tongue. I am not the frightened, rejected woman you found in that ballroom. I will not be manipulated or managed. If we are to play this game, we play it as partners, with honesty between us. Something like respect flickered in Fernando's eyes. Partners, he agreed, extending his hand. Shall we shake on it, as we did when you made me promise to let you ride my father's horses? Laura placed her hand in his, and once again felt that electric connection. Partners, she whispered. Fernando raised her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers, and pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles that seared through silk and skin directly into her thundering heart. "Tomorrow then, pequeña Laura. Prepare yourself. By the time I'm finished, all of London will believe you are the most fortunate woman in England. And what will you believe?" Fernando's smile was devastating. "That I am the most fortunate man." He escorted her back through the gardens, up the terrace steps and into the ballroom with the precise timing of a master strategist. They arrived just as the waltz was ending, ensuring maximum visibility for their return. Every eye fixed on them, every tongue prepared to wag. Fernando bowed over Laura's hand with courtly precision, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. "Until tomorrow, Lady Laura. I shall count the hours." And then he was gone, striding through the parted crowd with the confidence of a man who had just claimed a prize everyone else had overlooked. Laura returned to her table, where Sophia sat frozen with shock, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "My lady," Sophia finally gasped. "What just happened?" Laura reached for Sophia's abandoned champagne and took a long sip, her eyes meeting Edward's shocked gaze across the ballroom. "I believe," Laura said calmly. "I've just been rescued by a wolf." And for the first time in months she smiled. The scandal broke like a thunderstorm over London society the next morning. Laura sat in the cramped morning room of the Cecil townhouse, a modest establishment in an unfashionable corner of Mayfair, and watched her mother read the morning papers with increasing horror. "This is disastrous," Lady Margaret Cecil declared, her usually serene face pale with shock. The Duke of Valcarcel was observed in intimate conversation with Lady Laura C. in the gardens of Hartley Manor, leading many to speculate about the nature of their acquaintance. "Laura, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking," Laura replied with surprising calm as she spread marmalade on her toast, "that I was already the subject of gossip. At least now they're gossiping about something interesting." "Interesting?" Her mother's voice rose to an unprecedented pitch. "The Duke of Valcarcel is not interesting, my dear. He is dangerous. They say he killed a man in Spain. They say he fled the continent to escape prosecution. They say a great many things, Mama, most of which are likely exaggerated or entirely fabricated." Laura took a deliberate bite of toast, pleased with her own composure. "And regardless of what they say, the Duke is calling here this afternoon, and I intend to receive him." Lady Margaret's teacup clattered into its saucer. "Calling? Here? Laura, we cannot possibly. That is, our circumstances are hardly—" "He knows about our circumstances, Mama. He knows everything." Laura met her mother's worried gaze steadily. "And he doesn't care." That, at least, was partially true. Fernando had made it clear that Laura's lack of fortune meant nothing to him. What he hadn't made clear was why he was willing to attach his name to hers, risking his own reputation to salvage what remained of hers. What game was he truly playing? The clock had just struck 3 when Fernando arrived, announced by their ancient butler with trembling ceremony that suggested the old man feared the Spanish Duke might produce a sword at any moment. Fernando filled their modest drawing room with his presence, making the shabby furniture and faded wallpaper seem even more obviously worn. He wore dark green superfine wool coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, buff breeches, and boots polished to mirror shine. He was devastatingly, unfairly handsome. He bowed to Lady Margaret with perfect courtesy. "Lady Cecil, I am honored to make your acquaintance." Laura's mother rose and curtsied, her expression hovering between terror and fascination. "Your Grace, we are— that is, Laura has told me— that is to say—" "Mama met you once," Laura interjected smoothly, coming to her mother's rescue. "In Seville, though I'm certain you don't remember." Fernando's eyes found Laura's, and heat flashed between them. "On the contrary, I remember Lady Cecil's kindness to my father during the ambassador's visit. She complimented his library and listened patiently while he discoursed at length about 15th-century manuscripts." Lady Margaret's expression softened slightly. "You remember that? You were merely a boy. Some impressions remain vivid despite the passage of time." Fernando's gaze never left Laura. "Your daughter, for instance, made an impression I have never forgotten." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Lady Margaret glanced between them, her expression shifting from worry to speculation. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "I should check with Mrs. Henderson about refreshments. Laura, you will observe propriety, won't you?" "Of course, Mamma." The moment her mother departed, leaving the door strategically ajar, Laura noted, Fernando crossed to where Laura stood near the window. "Your home is charming," he said, though his tone suggested he found nothing charming about their obviously reduced circumstances. "You're a terrible liar." Laura kept her voice light. "Our home is shabby and small and barely respectable, but it's ours, and we're not in debtor's prison, so I consider us fortunate." Fernando's jaw tightened. "Your father left debts. Substantial ones. Gambling, mostly. He was a brilliant diplomat and a dreadful card player. A fatal combination." Laura moved away from the window, needing distance from Fernando's overwhelming presence. "We sold almost everything to satisfy his creditors. This house and a small income are what remained. It's sufficient for Mama and me, though it makes me unmarriageable to anyone seeking fortune with their bride." "You're not unmarriageable, you're selective." Fernando followed her, his movement predatory. "Or you were, until Hartley proved himself an idiot." Laura laughed, though the sound held little humor. "Edward proved himself practical. His father's gambling debts made Miss Pemberton's fortune irresistible. I understood, even if understanding didn't ease the humiliation." "Did you love him?" The directness of the question caught Laura off guard. She turned to find Fernando disturbingly close, his dark eyes searching her face with unnerving intensity. "I thought I did," she admitted. "Or perhaps I loved what he represented. Security, belonging, a future that didn't involve worry about money or status. But true love?" She shook her head. "No, I don't think either of us was truly in love." "Good." Fernando's voice had gone rough. "Because when you love someone, Pequeña Laura, it should consume you. It should make you reckless and brave and willing to burn the world down to keep them safe." Laura's breath caught. "And have you ever felt that way about someone?" Something dark and painful crossed Fernando's face. "Once. Long ago, it ended badly." Before Laura could press for details, her mother returned with Mrs. Henderson, their housekeeper, bearing a tray of tea and biscuits that represented their best china, and probably their last good tea leaves. Fernando accepted refreshment with every appearance of pleasure, though Laura suspected he was accustomed to far finer fare. He charmed her mother with stories about Seville, carefully edited to remove any hint of scandal or danger. He inquired about Laura's interests with what seemed like genuine curiosity. He was, in short, absolutely perfect. Too perfect. When he finally rose to leave, he bowed over Lady Margaret's hand with continental grace. "Lady Cecil, I hope you will permit me to call again tomorrow. Perhaps Lady Laura would enjoy a drive in Hyde Park." Laura's mother hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and the undeniable advantage of having a duke, scandalous or not, courting her daughter. "I believe that would be acceptable, Your Grace, provided proper chaperonage, of course." "Of course." Fernando turned to Laura. "Until tomorrow, Lady Laura." He held her gaze a moment too long, his eyes conveying messages she couldn't quite decipher, but felt in every nerve ending. After he departed, Lady Margaret sank into her chair with a dramatic sigh. "Well," she said faintly, "he's either your salvation or your ruination, my dear. Possibly both." Laura suspected her mother was entirely correct. The next afternoon, Fernando arrived with a curricle that probably cost more than the Cecil house. Laura, dressed in her best walking dress, a soft blue muslin that was only slightly outdated, allowed Fernando to hand her up into the vehicle, while Miss Sophia Bradshaw scrambled into the groom's seat behind them with considerably less grace. "Hyde Park during the fashionable hour," Fernando remarked as he guided the matched greys into traffic. "I trust you're prepared to be stared at." "I've been stared at since last night," Laura replied. "I'm becoming quite accustomed to it." "Excellent. Because my plan requires maximum visibility." Laura glanced at him sharply. "Your plan?" "To establish you as my particular interest." Fernando maneuvered around a slower carriage with easy skill. "By the end of this week, every matchmaking mama in London will be gnashing her teeth that you captured the prize they all coveted." "Did they covet you? I thought they considered you dangerous." "They consider me dangerous and wealthy, a combination they find both terrifying and irresistible." His smile was cynical. "Rich, titled foreigners are always objects of speculation. Add a hint of scandal and mystery, and we become absolutely fascinating." "How fortunate for you." "Fortunate?" Fernando's expression hardened. "You think it fortunate to be treated like an exotic animal in a menagerie, to have mothers throw their daughters at me while simultaneously warning those same daughters about my wicked foreign ways. Laura heard the bitterness beneath his words. I'm sorry. That was thoughtless of me. He glanced at her, his expression softening. No, you're right to call me out when I wallow in self-pity. I chose to remain in England despite everything. I could return to Spain if I wished. Could you? Laura asked gently. Or are the reasons you left still waiting for you there? Fernando's hands tightened on the reins. You're dangerously perceptive, Pequeña Laura. You're dangerously evasive, Your Grace. Fernando, she corrected. If we're to be partners in this scheme, you must trust me with the truth. What really brought you to England? What are you running from? For a long moment, Laura thought he wouldn't answer. They had entered Hyde Park now, and Fernando guided the curricle toward Rotten Row, where the fashionable set paraded each afternoon. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough that only Laura could hear over the clatter of hooves and wheels. My father died unexpectedly 3 years ago. A riding accident, they claimed, though I have reason to believe otherwise. When I examined his affairs, I discovered he had been systematically defrauded by his business partner, a man I had considered a friend. The partner, realizing I would uncover his theft, attempted to have me killed. Laura gasped. Merciful heavens! I survived. The assassin did not. I killed him in self-defense, but in Spain, such matters become complicated when the man you killed has powerful relatives. Fernando's jaw clenched. The Inquisition may be officially abolished, but powerful families still wield considerable influence. I could have fought the charges, but it would have meant years in legal battles, possibly imprisonment, certainly the destruction of everything my father built. So I took what remained of my fortune, came to England, and began rebuilding. And the business partner? Dead. Fernando's voice held no regret. He had the poor judgment to flee to London. We had a confrontation. He fell from a bridge into the Thames, regrettable. The casual way Fernando described the man's death sent a chill through Laura. This was not the gentle boy who had taught her to climb orange trees. This was a man who had learned to be ruthless, to protect himself in a world that had tried to destroy him. You're afraid I'm shocked, Fernando observed, noting her silence. I'm not shocked, Laura said slowly. I'm sad. Sad that the world took someone kind and forced him to become hard. Fernando pulled the curricle to a stop, ignoring the traffic building behind them. He turned to face Laura fully, his expression intense. I am hard, Laura. I have done things that would horrify you. I have destroyed men who crossed me. I have used my wealth and influence as weapons. I am not a hero from one of your novels. I never thought you were. Laura met his gaze steadily. But I also don't believe you're the villain you pretend to be. A true villain wouldn't have rescued me last night, wouldn't be helping me now. Perhaps I'm helping you for selfish reasons. Such as? Fernando's eyes dropped to her mouth. Perhaps I want you for myself. Heat flooded through Laura's body. Behind them, Sophia made a strangled sound. That's very forward, Your Grace, Laura managed, though her voice lacked conviction. I told you I'm not a gentleman. Fernando leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. But I'll try to be one for you, because you deserve better than the hand life has dealt you. You deserve to be cherished, protected, desired, and I find myself wanting to be the man who provides all three. Before Laura could respond, before she could even think, a familiar voice interrupted. Lady Laura, how delightful to see you. Laura turned to find Lady Ashworth's carriage pulled alongside theirs, the formidable matron's expression avid with curiosity. Lady Ashworth. Laura managed a polite smile. What a pleasant surprise. I was just telling dear Margaret, you remember Mrs. Fitzwilliam, about your appearance at the Hartley wedding. Such courage, my dear. And now here you are with the Duke of Valcastle. How utterly fascinating. Her tone suggested she found it scandalous rather than fascinating, but her eyes gleamed with the prospect of fresh gossip. Fernando transformed instantly. Gone was the intense, dangerous man who had been confessing his violent past. In his place sat a perfectly charming duke, his smile calculated to devastate. Lady Ashworth, what impeccable timing. I was just telling Lady Laura how the London parks pale in comparison to the gardens of Seville, but her company makes any setting delightful. Lady Ashworth's fan fluttered rapidly. Your Grace flatters, and your English is remarkably good, though of course one can still hear your... She paused delicately. Distinctive accent. How kind of you to notice. Fernando's smile didn't waver, but Laura detected steel beneath the charm. I find the English language somewhat limiting compared to Castilian, but one adapts. Indeed. Lady Ashworth's gaze sharpened on Laura. And Lady Laura, I must say you're looking remarkably well. The wedding didn't upset you too dreadfully. It was calculated cruelty disguised as concern. Laura felt her composure wavering. Fernando's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Lady Laura is far too sensible to be upset by others' choices, he said smoothly, particularly when those choices work to her advantage. After all, Hartley's loss is my considerable gain. The implication hung in the air, deliberate and unmistakable. Lady Ashworth's eyes widened. Your Grace, are you suggesting that is, you should expect, Fernando said with magnificent arrogance, that I know a rare treasure when I see one. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised Lady Laura I would show her the new paths near the Serpentine. He clicked to the horses and they moved forward, leaving Lady Ashworth gaping behind them. Once they were out of earshot, Laura released the breath she'd been holding. That was necessary, Fernando supplied. By this evening all of London will be speculating about my intentions toward you. By tomorrow you'll be invited to social events you couldn't have approached before. By next week, Edward Hartley will be kicking himself for being an idiot. You're very confident in your plan. I'm very good at manipulation. Fernando glanced at her, his expression softening. But for what it's worth, Pequeña Laura, I meant what I said. Hartley's loss truly is my gain. Laura's heart performed an alarming acrobatic feat in her chest. For the next hour, they drove through the park, encountering more acquaintances. Each encounter followed the same pattern. Fernando was charming, proprietary, and unmistakably claiming Laura as his particular interest. By the time they returned to the Cecil townhouse, Laura felt exhausted by the performance and confused by the increasingly complicated emotions Fernando provoked. As he handed her down from the curricle, Fernando held her hand a moment longer than necessary. Tomorrow, he said, there's a musicale at Lady Pemberton's. You'll attend as my guest. Lady Pemberton is Edward's mother-in-law, Laura protested. She'll never invite me. She already has. I took the liberty of ensuring it. Fernando's smile was wolfish. And you'll wear your finest dress and hold your head high while I make it absolutely clear that you're under my protection. This is madness. This is war, Pequeña Laura, and I always win. He bowed, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm, and departed, leaving Laura breathless and bewildered on her own doorstep. Sophia, who had been suspiciously quiet during the drive, finally spoke. My lady, I've served you for 3 years, and I must say something even if you dismiss me for impertinence. Laura turned, expecting censure about propriety. Instead, Sophia's eyes were soft with understanding. That man looks at you like you're water in a desert. Whatever game you think you're playing, I don't believe he's pretending. Laura opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, because Sophia might be right, and that possibility was more terrifying than any scandal. The musical at Lady Pemberton's was exactly as tedious as Laura had expected, with the added discomfort of being held in the home of her former suitor's new mother-in-law. But Fernando had been correct. An invitation had arrived that morning, written in Lady Pemberton's own hand, making it impossible to refuse without giving offence. Laura wore her one good evening dress, a cream silk with delicate embroidery that had belonged to her mother and had been carefully altered to fit Laura's slightly taller frame. It was outdated by 2 seasons but still elegant, and with her mother's pearls at her throat and her hair dressed in a simple but flattering style, Laura thought she looked reasonably presentable. Fernando clearly thought differently. His expression when he arrived to escort her was somewhere between awe and hunger, and it made Laura's stomach perform entirely improper gymnastics. "You're beautiful," he said simply, with no trace of practiced charm. Just honest observation that hit Laura harder than any flowery compliment. "You're flattering," she countered, trying to reclaim her composure. "I'm honest." He offered his arm. "Shall we go shock society some more?" They entered Lady Pemberton's elegant townhouse together, and Laura felt every eye in the crowded drawing room fix on them with predatory interest. Conversations faltered. Fans fluttered with increased vigor. The string quartet gamely continued their performance, but Laura doubted anyone was listening. Lady Pemberton approached them with the fixed smile of a hostess determined to maintain civility despite shock. "Your Grace, Lady Laura, how delightful that you could attend." Her tone suggested she found it anything but delightful, but Fernando smiled with perfect courtesy. "Lady Pemberton, how kind of you to include Lady Laura in your invitation. She was just telling me how much she enjoys chamber music." This was a blatant lie. Laura had never discussed music with Fernando, but Lady Pemberton beamed nonetheless. "Then you must sit near the performers, I insist." She led them to seats in the front row, ensuring they would be maximally visible to all assembled guests. Laura suspected Lady Pemberton was less concerned with their musical enjoyment than with observing them closely for scandal. As they settled into their seats, Laura became acutely aware of Edward and his bride sitting just 2 rows behind them. She could feel Edward's gaze boring into her back. Fernando leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. Ignore him. He had his chance, and wasted it. "I'm trying," Laura whispered back, "but this is excruciating." "Then let's make it less so." Fernando's hand found hers in the shadows between their chairs, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that was both comforting and shockingly intimate. The music began, a Mozart sonata performed with competent if uninspired technique. Laura tried to focus on the performance, but Fernando's thumb was tracing small circles on her palm, and it was doing extraordinary things to her ability to concentrate. "Stop that!" she hissed under cover of a particularly vigorous passage. "Stop what?" His voice was innocence itself, but his eyes danced with mischief. "You know exactly what. If you mean am I touching you in a manner designed to distract you from your discomfort and remind you that you're a desirable woman currently being courted by a duke, then yes, I'm doing that quite deliberately." Heat flooded Laura's cheeks. "Fernando, say my name again. I like how it sounds in your voice." This was dangerous. They were in public, surrounded by people watching their every interaction, and Laura was rapidly losing control of both the situation and her own treacherous heart. The sonata ended. Polite applause filled the room. Lady Pemberton stood to announce a brief intermission before the next performance. Fernando rose and offered Laura his hand. "A walk in the conservatory. I believe Lady Pemberton has a fine collection of orchids." It was blatant. Walking unchaperoned with a man in a darkened conservatory was practically a declaration of intimate intentions. Laura should refuse. Instead, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her from the drawing room, acutely aware of the scandalized whispers that followed them. The conservatory was indeed beautiful, a glass structure filled with exotic plants that perfumed the air with heavy, intoxicating scents. A few other guests wandered the paths, examining the botanical specimens, but Fernando guided Laura to a more secluded corner where the shadows were deeper and the sounds from the house more distant. "You're playing with fire," Laura said, trying to reclaim some control. "Every person in that room will be gossiping about this tomorrow. Let them." Fernando turned to face her, his expression serious. "Laura, I need to tell you something. That sounds ominous." "It may be." He took her hands in his, and Laura felt the slight tremor in his fingers. "When I said I remembered you from Seville, I didn't tell you the complete truth." Laura's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I remembered you, yes. The brave little girl with the wild hair who made me laugh when I badly needed laughter. But what I didn't say was that when I decided to come to England, when I chose London despite having no connections here, it was partly because I knew the Cecil family had returned to England. I thought perhaps—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I thought perhaps I might find that girl again, see what she had become." Laura stared at him. "You came to England because of me?" "Partly. I also came to escape prosecution and rebuild my fortune, so don't make me out to be more romantic than I am." His smile was self-deprecating. "But yes, Laura, you were always in the back of my mind, a memory of kindness and light in a childhood that had precious little of either." "Your childhood was unhappy?" Laura whispered. "My father loved me, but he was often absent, focused on his diplomatic work and business ventures. My mother died when I was young. I was raised by tutors and servants in a vast empty house." His thumbs stroked across her knuckles. "That summer you came, you brought life into that house. You laughed, you asked endless questions, You climbed my trees and fed my horses and generally created delightful chaos. When you left, the silence was unbearable. Tears pricked Laura's eyes. Fernando, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, he said quickly. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that this isn't just a game to me, that helping you, protecting you, it matters. You matter. Laura's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement, a strategic alliance to salvage her reputation. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, like standing on the edge of a precipice, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll trust me. Fernando raised one hand to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. Say you'll let me help you. Say you'll consider the possibility that perhaps fate brought us back together for a reason. Laura should be cautious, should remind him that they barely knew each other, that 15 years and childhood memories were insufficient foundation for any real attachment. Instead, she heard herself whisper, I'll try. Fernando's smile was radiant, transforming his face entirely. That's all I ask. He leaned closer, and for one heart-stopping moment, Laura thought he might kiss her. But instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture so tender it made her throat ache. Come, we should return before your reputation is completely destroyed. They walked back through the conservatory, their hands still linked, neither quite willing to break the contact. As they reached the door to the drawing room, a figure stepped from the shadows. Edward Hartley. Laura froze. Fernando's hand tightened on hers. Laura, Edward said, his voice strained. Might I have a word? No, Fernando replied before Laura could speak. You might not. Edward's face flushed. I was addressing Lady Laura, not you. Lady Laura is under my protection. Fernando's voice dropped to something dangerous. And I don't permit men who have hurt her to make further demands on her time. Hurt her, Edward's voice rose. I was perfectly honest about my situation. My father's debts required you to cast aside a woman you had courted for months in favor of a richer bride. Yes, we all understand your reasoning. That doesn't make it less cowardly. Edward took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. How dare you? Stop! Laura's voice cut through the rising tension. She looked at Edward, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Fernando is right. You were honest about your financial necessity, and I understood. But you were also cowardly in how you handled it. You let me hear about your engagement through gossip, rather than having the courage to tell me yourself. You didn't end our understanding so much as simply replace me. Edward's face went from red to pale. Laura, I know you never meant to hurt me, but you did. And I'm done allowing you to occupy space in my thoughts or heart. She squeezed Fernando's hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. I wish you happiness in your marriage, Edward. Truly. But I also wish for you to leave me alone. She turned and walked back into the drawing room, Fernando at her side, leaving Edward standing alone in the conservatory doorway. As they reclaimed their seats for the second half of the musicale, Fernando leaned close. You were magnificent, he murmured. Laura's hands were shaking, but she felt strangely light, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I was honest, she replied. It's liberating. Then be honest with me now. Fernando's eyes searched hers. This arrangement between us, is it still just a practical alliance to salvage your reputation? Or has it become something more? Laura's heart thundered. The truth would make her vulnerable, would give Fernando power to hurt her worse than Edward ever had. But hadn't she just said honesty was liberating? It's become more, she whispered. I don't know what exactly, but it's more. Fernando's smile was triumphant, tender, and utterly devastating. Good, he said, because, pequeña Laura, I fully intend to make you fall in love with me. And as the music swelled and society watched with avid curiosity, Laura realized with equal parts terror and excitement that he was well on his way to succeeding. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of calculated courtship, strategic appearances at society events, and increasingly intimate conversations that left Laura more confused and more deeply entangled with Fernando than she had ever intended. 3 weeks of his constant presence. Drives in Hyde Park, attendance at the opera, even a chaperoned visit to the British Museum, where Fernando had surprised her with his extensive knowledge of ancient history and made her laugh by comparing various society matrons to Roman empresses plotting in the Forum. 3 weeks of carefully constructed respectability that had transformed Laura from a figure of pity into an object of fascination and envy. And 3 weeks of growing desire that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Laura was no fool. She recognized the signs of a woman falling in love, the way her heart leapt whenever Fernando entered a room, the way his smile could illuminate her darkest moments, the way even his most casual touch sent heat racing through her veins. She was falling, had probably already fallen, and she had no idea if his feelings matched her own or if this was still, at its core, a game he was playing with masterful skill. The question was answered, partially and disastrously, on a mild June afternoon when Laura received an urgent note from Fernando requesting she meet him at his townhouse on Grosvenor Square. It was scandalous, an unmarried woman visiting a bachelor's residence, even in broad daylight. But the note's urgency troubled Laura enough that she convinced Miss Sophia to accompany her as chaperone. Fernando's townhouse was everything the Cecil residence was not. Grand, perfectly maintained, furnished with the latest taste and obvious wealth. A solemn butler admitted them and led Laura to Fernando's private study. He was standing at the window when she entered, his posture rigid, his shoulders tense in a way Laura had never seen before. "Fernando?" She approached carefully, aware of Sophia hovering anxiously in the doorway. "What's wrong?" He turned, and Laura's breath caught. His face was ashen, his eyes dark with something between rage and despair. "Close the door," he said to Sophia, "but remain in the hallway." Sophia obeyed, though her expression suggested she thought this highly improper. Once they were alone, Fernando crossed to Laura and took her hands in his. His grip was tight, almost painful. "I've received word from Spain," he said without preamble. "The charges against me have been dismissed. I'm free to return to Seville, to reclaim my father's estates, to resume my life there without fear of prosecution." Laura's heart stopped. That's wonderful news, isn't it?" "It should be." Fernando's voice was rough. "I've been fighting for this for 3 years. Spent a fortune in legal fees, in bribes, in strategic manipulation of court officials. I should be celebrating." "But you're not." "No." His eyes met hers, and the intensity there stole her breath, "because returning to Spain means leaving England, leaving London, leaving you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "Fernando," Laura whispered, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, my careful plan to salvage your reputation became something else entirely. I'm saying that I wake thinking of you and sleep dreaming of you. I'm saying that the idea of leaving you, of returning to Spain without you, is unbearable." Laura's hands trembled in his. "Then don't leave. It's not that simple." Fernando released her hands and paced away, his agitation evident. "My estates in Spain are vast, but they require management. The fortune my father left me is tied up in Spanish holdings, in vineyards and olive groves and businesses that need oversight. I've neglected them for 3 years, and they've suffered. If I don't return and take control, I'll lose everything my father built. So you must go." "I must go." He turned back to her, his face anguished. "Unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless you come with me, as my wife." Laura's world stopped. Sound faded. Time suspended. She stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. "Your wife," she repeated numbly. "I know it's sudden. I know I should have courted you longer, done this properly, asked your mother's blessing first." Fernando crossed back to her, taking her hands again with desperate urgency. "But Laura, I can't, I won't. Imagine my life without you in it. I've fallen in love with you, completely and irrevocably. The girl I remembered has become the woman I need. So I'm asking, even though I have no right, even though I'm doing this all wrong, will you marry me? Will you come to Spain as my duchess and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you?" Laura stared at him, her mind reeling. This was everything she had never dared hope for. A declaration of love, a proposal from a man she had come to care for desperately, an offer of security and position, and a future that included genuine affection. But beneath the joy surging through her, doubt whispered. "3 weeks ago," she said slowly, "you told me you were helping me to salvage my reputation, that you remembered me fondly from childhood. You never mentioned love." Fernando's grip tightened. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was doing a good deed. I thought I was helping an old friend while simultaneously establishing my own position in London society. I didn't plan to fall in love. And now, you've received word you can return to Spain, which requires a wife to manage your estates and provide you with heirs. How convenient that you have a candidate already at hand. Fernando's face paled. How you think I'm proposing because it's convenient? Because I need a duchess? I think, Laura said, her voice steadier than she felt, that you're a man accustomed to strategic thinking, that you plan moves ahead like a chess master, and I think it's very convenient that your sudden declaration of love coincides exactly with your need to return to Spain and your requirement for a wife to accompany you. That's not... Laura, I swear to you, I need time. Laura pulled her hands from his, stepping back despite the wounded look in his eyes. This is too much, too sudden. You're asking me to leave England, leave my mother, leave everything familiar, and travel to a foreign country with a man who, despite 3 weeks of courtship, is still largely a stranger to me. I thought we had grown closer than that. We have. Laura's throat ached. But growing closer doesn't mean I'm prepared to upend my entire life on what might be, what feels like, a strategically timed proposal. Fernando's expression hardened, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the mask of the cold duke London feared. I see. So you believe I'm manipulating you, using your feelings, if you even have feelings for me, to serve my own purposes. I don't know what I believe. Laura felt tears threatening and fought them back. I only know that I need time to think clearly, without you standing in front of me making everything more confusing. How much time? I don't know. I leave for Spain in 2 weeks, Laura. I've already booked passage on a ship from Portsmouth. I need an answer before then. The ultimatum hung between them, transforming the conversation from a proposal into something that felt uncomfortably like coercion. Then I suppose you'll have your answer in 2 weeks, Laura said, her voice cold despite the turmoil in her chest. She turned toward the door, needing to escape before her composure shattered entirely. Laura, wait. No. She spoke without turning back. Not now, Fernando, I can't, I need to go. She fled his study, collected the bewildered Sophia, and departed his townhouse in what could only be described as ignominious retreat. The scandal broke the next morning. Laura woke to her mother entering her bedchamber, her face white with shock, clutching a scandal sheet. Laura, you must see this. It's absolutely appalling. With shaking hands, Lady Margaret passed the paper to her daughter. The headline made Laura's stomach drop. Spanish Duke entraps desperate lady. Love or calculated fortune hunting. The article was devastating. Written in the gleeful, malicious tone scandal sheet specialized in, it painted Fernando as a fortune hunter who had targeted Laura specifically because her desperate circumstances made her vulnerable to manipulation. It claimed Fernando's estates in Spain were bankrupt, that he needed an English wife to provide him with funds and respectability, that his entire courtship had been calculated to entrap a woman too humiliated by rejection to think clearly. It quoted anonymous sources who swore Fernando had laughed about how easily Laura had fallen for his scheme. It suggested his Spanish title might be fraudulent. It insinuated that his reasons for leaving Spain were far more scandalous than mere legal troubles. The article destroyed Fernando's reputation and Laura's with surgical precision. This is lies, Laura said numbly. All of it. Fernando is wealthy. His title is legitimate. He never... Whether it's lies or truth hardly matters, her mother said gently. Society will believe what it wishes to believe. And right now, with this published, any association with the Duke of Valcarcel will destroy you far more thoroughly than Lord Hartley's rejection ever could. Laura felt the room spinning. Just yesterday she had been worried about the sincerity of Fernando's proposal. Now, regardless of his true feelings, association with him was social poison. The doorbell rang. Voices drifted up from the entrance hall. Loud, angry voices. Lady Margaret moved to the window and gasped. Laura, there are people outside, gathering. This is... Oh, my dear, this is very bad. Laura joined her mother at the window and felt ice flood her veins. At least 24 people crowded the street outside their modest townhouse, some clearly curious onlookers, others holding copies of the scandal sheet, still others shouting accusations and crude remarks about Spanish rogues and desperate spinsters. "We're under siege," Laura whispered. The butler appeared at the bedroom door, his expression deeply troubled. "Lady Cecil, Lady Laura, I fear I must inform you that several callers have arrived, and their purpose seems hostile. I've refused them entrance, but they're most insistent." Before Lady Margaret could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed from downstairs. Someone had thrown something through the front window. "Get away from the window!" Lady Margaret pulled Laura back just as another projectile, it looked like a cabbage, splattered against the glass. This was madness. This was a nightmare. And somewhere across London, Fernando was facing the same or worse. Laura spent the day trapped in her own home, listening to the crowd outside grow larger and more aggressive. Twice the Bow Street runners had to be summoned to disperse the mob. Invitations that had flooded the Cecil townhouse over the past weeks were withdrawn. Messengers arrived hourly with notes expressing regret that previous invitations had been extended in error. By evening, Laura was pacing her room like a caged animal, her mind reeling. She didn't believe the article's accusations. Fernando was many things, ruthless, calculating, dangerous, but he wasn't a fraud or a fortune hunter. His wealth was real, his title legitimate, his feelings were the question that tormented her. Had he truly fallen in love with her? Or had yesterday's proposal been, as she had accused, a matter of strategic convenience? And did it even matter now, with both their reputations in ruins? A soft knock sounded at her door. Sophia entered, her face pale. "My lady, there's a gentleman at the servants' entrance. He says he must speak with you urgently. He says it's a matter of life and death." Laura's heart leaped. "Fernando?" "No, my lady. Someone else. He wouldn't give his name, but he has a Spanish accent, and he says he has information about the Duke of Valcarcel that you need to hear." Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, possibly a trap, but Laura was desperate for answers, and desperate people took risks. "Show him to the morning room. Tell Mama I'm receiving a caller, and make sure the footmen remain nearby." 5 minutes later, Laura entered the morning room to find a man waiting. Middle-aged, well-dressed in sober colors, with the bearing of a gentleman and eyes that held profound sadness. "Lady Laura," he bowed. "Thank you for seeing me. My name is Rafael Mendoza. I was Fernando Montanilla's father's solicitor and closest friend." Laura's pulse quickened. "You knew Fernando's father? You're from Spain?" "I arrived in London 3 days ago, bringing the legal documents confirming the dismissal of charges against Fernando." Rafael's accent was heavier than Fernando's, his English more formal. "When I read this morning's scandal sheet, I knew I had to speak with you immediately." "Why?" "Because the accusations in that article are not merely false. They are deliberate lies planted by a man who has been Fernando's enemy for years. A man who stands to gain everything if Fernando is destroyed." Laura sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. "Tell me everything." Rafael Mendoza's story unfolded like a Gothic novel, complete with betrayal, attempted murder, and a villain of staggering venality. The villain's name was Don Miguel Salazar, and he had been Fernando's father's business partner for 2 decades. He was also, Rafael revealed, the man who had orchestrated the old Duke's death. "It was not a riding accident," Rafael said, his voice heavy with grief and anger. "Miguel paid servants to sabotage the Duke's saddle. When Fernando began investigating his father's death and uncovered Miguel's systematic theft of the estate's assets, Miguel hired an assassin. Fernando told me," Laura said quietly. "He told me he killed a man in self-defense." "He did. And then Miguel used his political connections to charge Fernando with murder, knowing that fighting the charges in Spain would bankrupt Fernando and allow Miguel to complete his theft of the Valcarcel estates." Rafael's hands clenched. Fernando fled to England not as a coward, but to preserve what remained of his fortune and to fight Miguel from a position of strength. "And he succeeded," Laura said. "The charges were dismissed." "Yes, but Miguel is not finished. He has agents here in London, including several journalists who owe him favors." Rafael pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is a letter I intercepted from Miguel to the scandal sheet that published this morning's article. It details exactly what lies to print and offers payment for their publication." Laura took the letter with shaking hands. It was written in Spanish, but Rafael had provided a translation. The contents made her blood run cold. Miguel Salazar had targeted Laura specifically because Fernando's growing attachment to her was evident. By destroying Laura's reputation and painting Fernando as a calculating fortune hunter, Miguel hoped to either force Fernando to return to Spain in disgrace or, failing that, to make Fernando's position in London so untenable that he would be unable to return to Spain and reclaim his estates. If Fernando doesn't return to Seville within the next month, Rafael explained, Spanish law allows Miguel, as the remaining business partner, to claim the entire estate through abandonment. Fernando would lose everything, his father's legacy, the family's wealth, his title's authority. Miguel would win. This is monstrous, Laura whispered. Miguel Salazar is a monster, Rafael agreed, but he's also clever. This scandal serves multiple purposes. It isolates Fernando from English society that might support him. It makes marriage to you impossible without dragging you down as well. And it creates a situation where Fernando's only option is to slink back to Spain defeated or stay in England in exile. Laura's mind raced, analyzing the situation with increasing anger. Fernando was trapped. Returning to Spain meant facing a powerful enemy who had already tried to kill him once. But staying in England meant losing everything his father had built. And she, Laura Cecil, dismissed and desperate, had become a weapon in this war. "What does Fernando plan to do?" she asked. Rafael's expression grew troubled. "I don't know. I came to you first because I thought you deserved the truth. Fernando is—" He hesitated. "Fernando has been hurt badly by those he trusted. By Miguel, who he considered an uncle. By Spanish society, which abandoned him when he was falsely accused. He has learned to rely only on himself, to trust no one completely. I worried he might not tell you the full truth because he fears your rejection more than he fears Miguel's machinations. He proposed to me yesterday," Laura heard herself say. "He asked me to marry him and return to Spain with him." Rafael's face transformed with hope. "And your answer?" "I accused him of proposing for strategic reasons, of manipulating me." Shame flooded through Laura. "I told him I needed time to think, and I left. And now this scandal has broken, and everything is worse, and I don't know—" "You must go to him," Rafael said urgently. "The scandal has hit his household worse than yours. There's a mob outside his townhouse on Grosvenor Square. His servants have been attacked. He's barricaded inside, and I fear—" Rafael's voice dropped. "I fear he believes you will reject him now, that the scandal has destroyed any possibility of happiness, and that a man without hope is capable of dangerously reckless decisions." Laura stood, her decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "Then I must go to him immediately. Lady Laura, the mob outside his house is violent. The situation is dangerous." "Then it's fortunate," Laura said with a smile that felt strange on her face after the day's horrors, "that I once climbed trees and fed horses and learned to be brave. Take me to him, Mr. Mendoza. It's time I reminded Fernando Montanilla that he's not alone in this fight." Getting to Fernando's townhouse required a strategy worthy of a military campaign. The crowds outside the Cecil residence had dispersed after dark, but Rafael warned that the mob besieging Grosvenor Square had only grown larger as evening fell. "We'll need a closed carriage," he said, as they huddled in the Cecil servants' entrance. "And we'll approach from the mews rather than the front entrance." Lady Margaret, who had insisted on being included in the planning despite her terror, pressed a small pistol into Laura's hands. "Your father's," she said quietly. "I know it's not ladylike, but neither is mob violence. If anyone tries to harm you, I'll defend myself." Laura tucked the pistol into her reticule, praying she wouldn't need it. The ride across London in Raphael's hired carriage was tense. Through the curtained windows, Laura could see crowds gathered on street corners, clutching scandal sheets and shouting about foreign corruption and moral decay. The article had unleashed something ugly in London society, a xenophobic fury that Fernando's foreignness made him an easy target for. As they approached Grosvenor Square, the sounds of the mob grew louder, shouting, breaking glass, the occasional shriek of someone hurt in the crush of bodies. "This is madness," Laura breathed. "This is what Miguel intended," Rafael said grimly. "He wanted Fernando isolated, vulnerable, without allies or support. He's succeeded beyond even his cynical expectations." The carriage turned into the mews behind Fernando's townhouse. Even here, away from the main mob, small groups of people loitered, hoping for violence or scandal to observe. Raphael knocked on the servants' entrance, a specific pattern that was apparently prearranged. The door opened a crack, and a frightened footman peered out. "Señor Mendoza, thank God, His Grace is— the situation is very bad." They were ushered inside quickly. The servants' area was in disarray. Clearly Fernando's staff had been preparing for siege, gathering supplies and boarding up vulnerable windows. "Where is the Duke?" Raphael demanded. "In his study, sir. He's been there since the scandal broke. He won't eat, won't see anyone. We're deeply worried." Laura's heart clenched. "Take me to him, immediately." The footman looked uncertain. A lady shouldn't visit a gentleman's private study unchaperoned, but Raphael nodded permission, and propriety seemed irrelevant given the circumstances. They climbed the servants' stairs to the main floor, then down a hallway to the study Laura had visited just yesterday. The footman knocked softly. "Your Grace, Señor Mendoza is here, and he's brought a visitor." No response. Raphael exchanged a worried glance with Laura, then opened the door without permission. The study was in darkness except for a dying fire in the grate. Fernando sat in a chair near the window, still in his daytime clothes, staring out at the mob below with an expression of such profound defeat that Laura's throat ached. "Fernando," Raphael said gently, "I've brought someone to see you." Fernando didn't turn. "Tell whoever it is to go away. I'm not receiving visitors." "Not even me?" Laura stepped forward into the firelight where he could see her. Fernando's head snapped around, his eyes widening with shock. He stood abruptly, swaying slightly, whether from exhaustion or emotion, Laura couldn't tell. "Laura, what are you? You shouldn't be here, it's dangerous. Your reputation—" "My reputation is already destroyed," Laura said calmly, crossing to stand before him. "According to this morning's scandal sheet, I'm a desperate spinster who allowed herself to be seduced and manipulated by a fraudulent fortune hunter. My social standing cannot possibly sink lower." Fernando's face twisted with pain. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to touch you. I thought I could protect you, but I've only made everything worse." "You didn't make this worse. Miguel Salazar did." Laura glanced at Raphael. "Mr. Mendoza has told me everything. The truth about your father's death, about Miguel's betrayal, about why you really came to England." Fernando's expression cycled through shock, then anger toward Raphael, then something like resignation. "I see. And now you understand that your initial instinct was correct. My proposal was strategic. I need to return to Spain. I need a wife to help me reclaim my estates and present a united front against Miguel, and you were conveniently positioned to serve that purpose." His voice was bitter, self-loathing, and utterly convinced of his own unworthiness. Laura wanted to shake him. Instead, she stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the shadows under his eyes from sleepless nights, could smell the sandalwood scent that had become so familiar. "You're wrong," she said softly. Fernando blinked. "What?" "You're wrong about why you proposed. Or at least you're not being entirely honest with yourself about your motivations." Laura raised her hand and cupped his face, feeling the muscle jump under his jaw at her touch. "Yes, you need to return to Spain. Yes, you need to defeat Miguel and reclaim your estates. But you didn't propose to me because I was convenient, Fernando. You proposed because somewhere in the past 3 weeks you fell in love with me." "Laura, let me finish." Her voice was firm. "I know you love me because I've seen it in every gesture, every word, every careful touch. I've seen it in how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I've seen it in how you defend me, protect me, try desperately to give me the life you think I deserve. You love me, Fernando Montanilla, and the fact that your love coincided with your need to return to Spain doesn't make it less real. It makes it more complicated, certainly, but not less real." Fernando's hands came up to grasp her wrists, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "And what about you? Do you love me, Laura? Or do you just want the security my title and wealth provide?" Laura had come here prepared to be brave, but this required a different kind of courage, the courage to be utterly vulnerable with a man who had the power to destroy her heart more thoroughly than any scandal sheet ever could. "I love you," she said, and watched his eyes widen with shock and hope. "I fell in love with you so gradually. I didn't recognize it was happening until it was too late to protect myself. I love your intelligence and your cunning, and the way you look at me like I'm something precious and rare. I love that you remember a little girl who climbed your orange trees 15 years ago. I love that you're ruthless when necessary, but tender when you think no one is watching. I love even your arrogance and your manipulation, because they come from a place of protecting the people you care about. Laura. Her name was a prayer on his lips. And I will marry you, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I will go with you to Spain. I will stand beside you against Miguel Salazar and anyone else who threatens what we're building. Not because you manipulated me, not because I'm desperate for security, but because I choose you, because I choose us. Because a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection is worth fighting for. The scandal, will fade, eventually. But right now there's a mob outside your house and we need a plan. Fernando stared at her, as if she had appeared from nowhere with divine intervention. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the calculated, charming smile he used in society, but something genuine and luminous that made him look like the boy who had taught her to be brave. You want a plan? He pulled her closer until they were nearly touching. Very well, here's my plan. We marry immediately, by special license. Then we travel to Spain together, with Rafael and whatever staff is willing to accompany us. We arrive in Seville with you as my Duchess, presenting a united front that makes Miguel's accusations of fortune hunting look ridiculous. We reclaim my father's estates through the legal channels Rafael has prepared. And we build a life together, in Spain, in England, wherever we choose, because damn what society thinks. That's an excellent plan, Laura smiled, though you're missing a few details. Such as how we're getting out of this house past that mob, and how we're obtaining a special license when the Archbishop's office will have heard about the scandal, and how we're ensuring my mother doesn't die of apoplexy at the idea of me rushing into marriage with a supposedly disgraced duke. Fernando's smile turned wolfish. Leave those details to me. I told you I'm very good at manipulation when properly motivated. And I'm properly motivating. Instead of answering with words, Fernando pulled her fully against him and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, careful kisses society permitted during courtship. This was desperate, passionate, claiming, a kiss that said mine and yours and finally, all at once. Laura's hands fisted in his coat, pulling him closer, and Fernando's arms banded around her with bruising intensity, as if he feared she might disappear if he loosened his grip. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rafael cleared his throat pointedly from the doorway where he'd been diplomatically watching the window rather than the kiss. If you two are quite finished, we should discuss logistics. The mob outside is growing more violent, and I received word that some of Miguel's paid agitators are encouraging them to actually breach the house. Fernando's expression hardened, the lover disappearing behind the calculating duke. Then we implement the contingency plan. Rafael, alert the staff that we're evacuating tonight. Send word to the docks to prepare my ship. We'll depart for Portsmouth immediately, rather than waiting 2 weeks. Tonight? Laura asked. But my mother, my belongings. We'll send for your mother once we're safely out of London, and she can follow with your belongings by a later ship if she chooses. Fernando's hands framed her face. Laura, I won't risk your safety. If that mob decides to attack, they won't distinguish between me and anyone unfortunate enough to be with me. We leave tonight, while we still can. Laura wanted to argue, but the sound of breaking glass from somewhere below decided her. Then I suppose we're eloping, she said with more calm than she felt. Fernando's smile was fierce with admiration. You're remarkable. Do you know that? I climbed your orange trees, Laura reminded him. I was always remarkable. You just had to remember it. The escape from Fernando's besieged townhouse was accomplished with a combination of careful timing, generous bribery, and Rafael's strategic thinking. While Fernando's remaining servants created a distraction at the front entrance, shouting and throwing open shutters as if preparing to address the mob, Fernando, Laura, Rafael, and 2 trusted footmen slipped out through the mews with minimal luggage. They didn't take Fernando's crested carriages, which would be instantly recognized. Instead, they climbed into a nondescript hired coach that Rafael had arranged and departed into the London night like thieves escaping justice. Laura watched through the coach window as they left Mayfair behind, heading southeast toward the Portsmouth Road. Her mother would be frantic when she learned Laura had left. Her belongings, her few treasured possessions, remained behind in the Cecil townhouse. She was leaving England, possibly forever, with almost nothing but the clothes on her back and the man sitting beside her. And yet, she felt strangely light, free. Fernando's hand found hers in the darkness of the coach. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Laura considered the question honestly. Everything she had known, every security she had clung to, was disappearing behind them with each mile the horses covered. "No," she said, realizing it was true. "No regrets, only excitement about what comes next." Fernando raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her shiver. "What comes next is approximately 6 hours to Portsmouth, where a priest who owes me considerable favors is waiting to marry us. Then we board my ship and sail for Spain as husband and wife, Duke and Duchess, ready to face whatever Miguel has planned. And after we defeat Miguel, after?" Fernando's voice softened. "After, we build the life we choose. Divide our time between Spain and England, if you wish. Fill my father's empty house with light and laughter and, if you're willing, children who will climb the orange trees as you once did." Laura's throat tightened with emotion. "That sounds perfect." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the coach's swaying motion and Fernando's warm presence beside her, making Laura drowsy despite the danger they'd just escaped. "Laura," Fernando said eventually, "I need to tell you something." His tone made her pulse quicken. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just honest." He shifted to face her more fully, and even in the darkness she could see the intensity in his expression. "When I proposed yesterday, you accused me of strategic timing, of manipulating you, and you were partially right." Laura's heart clenched, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "The timing was strategic," Fernando admitted. "I did need to return to Spain, did need a wife, did recognize that marrying you would serve multiple purposes. But Laura, I swear to you, the love I confessed was real, is real. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. I didn't intend for this arrangement to become something that would consume my every thought. But it did. You did. Fernando, let me finish." His hands tightened on hers. "I'm not good at vulnerability. I've spent 3 years building walls to protect myself from betrayal and hurt. But those walls are useless against you. You see through them, climb over them, dismantle them with patience and kindness and fierce courage. You terrify me, Pequeña Laura, because you have the power to hurt me worse than Miguel ever could. But you also give me hope that perhaps I'm not too damaged to deserve happiness." Laura's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You're not damaged, you're strong. There's a difference." "Perhaps." Fernando cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "But either way, I want you to know, whatever happens in Spain, whatever we face together, you're not my strategic alliance or my convenient solution. You're my partner, my equal, the person I choose every day, regardless of what logic or strategy might dictate." "I choose you too," Laura whispered, "every day, without regret." Fernando kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter, filled with promise and hope rather than desperation. When they finally drew apart, Laura asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What will we do about Miguel? If he's as powerful and connected as Raphael says, then we'll outmaneuver him." Fernando's voice turned cold, calculating. "Miguel's weakness is his arrogance. He believes I'm isolated, defeated, without resources or allies. He believes I'll return to Spain alone and vulnerable. Instead, I'll arrive with you, a duchess from an impeccable English family, with connections to diplomatic circles through your late father. We'll have Raphael's legal documentation proving Miguel's fraud, and we'll have the support of my father's old friends, men who have been waiting for me to return and reclaim what's rightfully mine. It sounds dangerous. It will be. Miguel doesn't forgive, and he doesn't surrender." Fernando's expression was grim. "But I won't risk you unnecessarily. When we confront him, you'll be safely protected." Laura raised her eyebrows. "Protected, I think not. If we're partners, Fernando, then I stand beside you when you face your enemies. Not behind you, not safely tucked away." "Laura, no." Her voice was firm. "I didn't agree to marry you so you could wrap me in cotton wool and hide me from anything unpleasant. I agreed to be your duchess, your partner, your equal. That means I face the dangers with you." Fernando stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that transformed his face. "You really are the bravest person I've ever met. Very well, we face Miguel together. But if things go badly, Pequeña Laura, promise me you'll run. Promise me you'll save yourself. Only if you promise the same." "That's not exactly," Laura smiled. "We're in this together, Fernando, for better or worse, starting tonight." They reached Portsmouth just before dawn. The priest Fernando had mentioned was indeed waiting. An elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions about their irregular situation and married them in a small church overlooking the harbour as the sun rose over the water. Laura wore the same travelling dress she'd worn escaping London. Fernando had no ring to offer. There were no flowers, no guests, no celebration. It was the most perfect wedding Laura could imagine. "I, Fernando Sebastian Montanilla de Valcárcel, take you, Laura Catherine Cecil, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Fernando said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the words. "I, Laura Catherine Cecil, take you, Fernando Sebastian Montanilla de Valcárcel, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Laura replied, and watched something like wonder cross Fernando's face. The priest pronounced them married. Fernando kissed her, gently, reverently, as if she was something infinitely precious and fragile, and Laura, daughter of a diplomat with more breeding than money, became Her Grace, the Duchess of Valcárcel. They boarded Fernando's ship within the hour, a sleek merchant vessel he'd purchased 2 years earlier for transporting his own goods between Spain and England. The captain, a weathered man named Harrison who'd served Fernando with unquestioning loyalty, didn't even blink at the request to depart immediately, rather than in 2 weeks. "Right you are, Your Grace, he said, nodding to both Fernando and Laura. "We'll catch the tide within the hour." Laura stood at the ship's railing as Portsmouth's harbour receded behind them, England disappearing into morning mist. Fernando came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Cold?" he murmured. "A little, but mostly just overwhelmed." Laura leaned back against his solid warmth. "This morning I woke in London as disgraced Lady Laura. Now I'm the Duchess of Valcárcel, married to a Spanish duke, sailing to a country I haven't seen in 15 years, preparing to face a villain straight out of a melodrama. When you list it like that, it does sound rather absurd." Fernando's arms tightened. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," Laura admitted, "but also excited. Is that strange?" "It's honest." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I love your honesty almost as much as I love your courage." They stood together, watching the English coastline fade, and Laura thought about the journey ahead, the confrontation with Miguel, the challenge of reclaiming Fernando's estates, the task of navigating Spanish society as a foreign duchess, the uncertainty of building a life in an unfamiliar place. And yet, with Fernando's arms around her and the morning sun painting the waves gold, Laura felt only anticipation. "Tell me about our home," she said softly. "The house in Seville. What's it like?" Fernando's voice warmed with memory and longing. "It's old. Parts of it date back to the Moors. The walls are white stucco that stays cool even in the hottest summer. There are courtyards with fountains and orange trees, the same trees you climbed as a child. In spring, the scent of orange blossoms fills every room. In the evening, you can hear nightingales in the garden. It sounds beautiful." It was. His voice grew quiet. "Before my father died, before Miguel's betrayal, it was the happiest place I knew. I want to make it happy again, Laura. With you." Laura turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Then we'll make it happy. Together." The voyage to Spain took 9 days. 9 days in which Laura and Fernando existed in a strange bubble of intimacy and discovery, learning each other's rhythms and habits without the constraints of society watching. Fernando proved to be different in private than the cold, calculating Duke London society feared. He was funny, self-deprecating, passionate about architecture and history. He read to Laura in Spanish, teaching her the language she had forgotten from childhood. He told her stories about his father, a complicated man who had loved deeply but struggled to express emotion, and about his lonely childhood in that beautiful house. Laura, in turn, shared her own history, her father's gambling addiction that had destroyed their finances. her mother's quiet strength in adversity, her own dreams of someday mattering to someone, of building a family that might heal the loneliness she'd carried since childhood. They talked late into each night, wrapped in blankets on the deck while stars wheeled overhead. They discovered shared passions for literature and music, debated politics and philosophy, argued cheerfully about whether English or Spanish food was superior, and they navigated the physical intimacy of marriage with a mixture of awkwardness and growing confidence that made them both laugh and ache in equal measure. "I never expected marriage to be like this," Laura admitted one night as they lay in the narrow bunk of the captain's cabin Fernando had given them. "Like what?" Fernando's fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm. "Like friendship. Like choosing to be together rather than being forced by circumstance." She shifted to look at him, his face shadowed in the lamplight. "My parents' marriage was one of duty. They were cordial, but not this." "This," Fernando echoed, smiling. "And what is this exactly?" "Partnership, conversation, laughter, passion." Laura felt herself blush even as she said it. "Everything I never dared hope for." Fernando rolled to face her fully, his expression serious. "Then make me a promise, Laura. Promise that if I ever stop treating you as a partner, if I ever try to manage you or manipulate you or take you for granted, you'll call me on it immediately. I don't want to become the kind of husband who forgets his wife is an equal. I promise. And you make me the same promise. If I ever become complacent or stop challenging you or forget that we chose each other, remind me." "Deal." He sealed it with a kiss that quickly became something more heated. Later, as Fernando slept beside her, Laura listened to the ship's timbers creaking and the waves slapping against the hull. In 9 days they would arrive in Spain. They would dock at Cadiz, travel overland to Seville, and confront Miguel Salazar with the truth of his crimes. It should terrify her. Instead, she felt ready, because she wasn't facing it alone. She had Fernando, who loved her fiercely and trusted her completely. She had Rafael, whose loyalty and legal expertise would prove invaluable. She had her own courage, remembered and reclaimed. She had everything she needed. 2 years later, the orange trees were in full bloom, their perfume drifting through the open windows of the Palacio Valcárcel and mixing with the sound of a baby's delighted laughter. Laura stood in the nursery doorway, watching Fernando hold their 7-month-old son, Tomás, up to see the blossoms outside the window. "Sí, pequeño?" Fernando said in Spanish, his voice tender. "Those are orange blossoms. When you're bigger, I'll teach you to climb these trees just as I taught your mother." Tomás responded by grabbing a fistful of his father's hair and yanking enthusiastically. Laura laughed as Fernando grimaced, but didn't pull away, too enchanted by his son to care about his abused hair. 2 years. 2 years since she and Fernando had arrived in Seville as newlyweds, armed with Rafael's documentation and a determination to reclaim what Miguel Salazar had stolen. The confrontation had been dramatic. Miguel had tried first to deny the accusations, then to intimidate them with his political connections, finally to flee when Rafael produced irrefutable proof of his fraud and conspiracy to murder. The Spanish courts had been remarkably swift once the evidence was presented. Miguel was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence, his own fortune seized to repay what he'd stolen. Fernando's estates had been restored. Not just restored, but expanded. With Laura's help managing the business side and Fernando's strategic investments, the Valcárcel fortune had grown beyond what the old duke could have imagined. But more than wealth had been restored. The house itself had come alive again. Fernando's distant relatives, who had withdrawn during the scandal, cautiously returned and were now regular visitors. The empty rooms were filled with staff who were treated with respect rather than indifference. The gardens rang with voices and music rather than silence. And now, with little Tomás, the house had something it hadn't possessed in decades: hope for the future. "Laura!" Her mother's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Your guests are arriving." Lady Margaret had indeed followed them to Spain 6 months after their hasty marriage, once the scandal in London had died down, and she'd settled her affairs in England. She'd taken to Spanish life with surprising enthusiasm, learning the language with determination, and charming Fernando's aristocratic neighbours with her combination of English propriety and genuine warmth. Laura descended the grand staircase, recently restored to its original magnificence, to greet the stream of guests arriving for the garden party she and Fernando were hosting. Among them were several English visitors. Surprisingly, London society had gradually come to view the Valcarcel scandal with a different perspective once the truth about Miguel's machinations became known. Lady Laura's daring elopement with the Spanish Duke was now viewed as romantically brave rather than socially reckless. Even Edward Hartley and his wife had sent a stiff but cordial letter of congratulations when Tomás was born. Laura found she bore them no ill will. Edward's rejection had freed her for something infinitely better. As the afternoon wore on, Laura mingled with their guests, a mix of Spanish nobility, English expatriates, and the growing community of artists and intellectuals. Fernando had begun patronizing. She spoke in Spanish and English interchangeably, confident in both languages now, comfortable in her role as duchess and hostess. As the sun began setting, painting the white walls of the palace golden, Fernando found her in the garden. Tomás was sleeping against his father's shoulder, exhausted by the day's excitement. "There you are," Fernando said softly, sliding his free arm around Laura's waist. "I looked up during conversation with the Marquise and couldn't find you. For a moment I panicked, thinking you'd disappeared like a dream." "I'm very real," Laura assured him, leaning into his solid warmth, "and not going anywhere." They stood together, watching their guests enjoy the garden, the fountains, the orange trees heavy with blossoms. Music drifted from the ballroom where some of the younger guests were dancing. "Do you ever regret it?" Fernando asked quietly. "Leaving England, your friends, everything familiar?" Laura considered the question seriously, as she always did when Fernando revealed his vulnerabilities. "I miss England sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the rain, oddly enough, and English tea, and certain friends, but regret, never." She turned to face him more fully. "I found myself here, Fernando, not just as your duchess, but as Laura, the person I was meant to be, brave and fierce and thoroughly improper when necessary." Fernando's smile was radiant. "You were always those things, Pequeña Laura. I just helped you remember." "We helped each other remember," Laura corrected. "You remembered that you're capable of gentleness and trust, not just ruthless strategy. I remembered that I'm capable of taking risks and choosing my own path." Tomás stirred against Fernando's shoulder, making small, sleepy noises. Laura reached out to stroke her son's dark hair, so like his father's, and felt her heart swell with contentment. This was everything she had never dared dream of. A partner who challenged and cherished her, a home that felt alive with possibility, a child who represented hope and future, a life built not on obligation or necessity, but on choice and love. "What are you thinking?" Fernando asked, reading her expression. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best. That humiliation at Edward's wedding led directly to this, to you, to Tomás, to this life. Are you suggesting we should thank Edward?" Fernando's tone was teasing. "Absolutely not. I'm suggesting we should thank ourselves for being brave enough to choose each other despite the obstacles." Fernando shifted Tomás carefully so he could pull Laura closer, kissing her with the practiced ease of 2 years of marriage, but also the tenderness of new discovery. "I choose you," he murmured against her lips. "Every day, today, tomorrow, and every day after." "And I choose you," Laura whispered back. "Always." From the ballroom, music swelled, a waltz, romantic and sweeping. Fernando grinned. "Shall we dance, Your Grace? We are hosting a party, after all." "What about Tomás?" "I'll take him." Lady Margaret appeared as if summoned, her eyes soft as she carefully extracted her sleeping grandson from Fernando's arms. "You two go dance. Enjoy being young and in love." She departed with Tomás, leaving Laura and Fernando alone in the garden as twilight deepened and the first stars appeared. Fernando bowed with exaggerated formality. "Lady Laura, forgive me. Her Grace the Duchess of Valcarcel, would you do me the honor of this dance?" Laura curtsied with equal theatricality. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." But as Fernando pulled her close and they began moving to the distant music, Laura dropped the pretense. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me this life." Fernando's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for being brave enough to climb into that curricle in Hyde Park, for trusting me despite my reputation, for choosing partnership over safety. They danced in the garden beneath the orange trees as night fell over Seville, and Laura thought about the girl she'd been, lonely, uncertain, defined by others' expectations and rejections. That girl was gone, transformed into a woman who knew her own strength, claimed her own desires, built her own happiness. And as Fernando spun her through the garden, where she had once climbed trees as a child, where their son would someday climb those same trees, where their story had truly begun all those years ago, Laura knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged, not because a duke had rescued her from humiliation, but because she had been brave enough to rescue herself, and in doing so, had found a partner worth keeping forever. The end. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. We truly hope Laura and Fernando's journey touched your heart as much as it touched ours. If you felt moved, surprised, or simply entertained, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who loves romance, and leaving a comment below. We absolutely love reading your thoughts. And if you haven't yet, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and help us grow. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for supporting us. Your encouragement keeps us inspired to bring more stories filled with passion, redemption, and emotional twists. At the end of this video, another beautiful story awaits you. Click and be surprised by more unforgettable romance. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.